Hey everybody, Dr. Jared Skowron from Spectrum Awakening. We're going to be talking about different diets. Now, diet is a four-letter word, but different diets with kids in the spectrum can be really beneficial and really helpful in a lot of ways. So the unfortunate answer with diets is that there is no one right answer. So what we need to do is make sure that we can help you find the perfect diet for your child, because we're all different, okay? You're different, I'm different, our kids are different, they're different, he's different, she's different. Everybody's a little bit different, especially when it comes to the different foods that our body does well with and the different foods that our body doesn't like, okay? So what I want to do is kind of talk about the overarching appeal of these diets, why they're so popular, why they work, or sometimes why they don't work. And what does the science say, and how can we figure out what you should do for your kid? Okay, so let's start out first with just food in general, okay? Food in general is obviously our source for nutrients. We need the calories, we need the vitamins, we need the proteins, we need the fats, we need all of this good stuff that comes from food, okay? Unfortunately, sometimes there are certain foods that our body doesn't like, and our body actually finds that certain foods are an enemy. All right. And what I want you to think about is how our body would normally respond to an infection. All right. Let's say we get a cold. Let's say, we get the flu. Let's say we get strep throat. Let's say we get whatever. Okay. What our body does is look at any kind of substance that comes into it. All right. Whether we are touching something and putting it in our mouth and eventually swallow it into our gut, or whether we're breathing something and it goes into our nose and our lungs and our sinuses, our body is going to examine everything that we come in contact with. And it's going to decide, am I friend or am I foe? All right. And that's what our body does. Live shout out to Alexandra here. She's so happy. She's the first one to comment on today's Facebook Live. Alexandra is one of our great mothers out in Romania. She wants me to remind you that we now are starting to get international distributors across the world. So if you are in Europe or the UK, check out Mandy Mart. And if you're in India, check out Super Supplements. And we are working with other people in other countries to try to create international distributors so you can get our stuff without having to pay for shipping, without having to pay for customs, all that. So if you're in Europe, the UK, check out Mandy Mart. If you're in India, check out Super Supplements. All right, so let's continue. Our body is going to always, every second, analyze friend or foe, all right? Not and if our body finds something as a foe, let's pretend, we breathe in a virus and we breathe in a bacteria or we eat a bacteria. Our body is going to look at it, recognize it as foe, and start an immune response against it, okay? So what happens, let's say I get strep throat. Our body looks at the strep bacteria, it says, that's a foe. I'm gonna start to create an immune system attack against it, which includes something called antibodies, okay? We're familiar with the word antibodies because we have antibiotics, all right? Antibodies are just part of our immune system that recognizes a certain individual item, whether that be a bacteria or a virus or a food or an allergen or whatever. And say, okay, I recognize this substance. I think it's the enemy, so I'm going to create antibodies to just attack that one thing. That's why we can do blood work and blood tests and look for these antibodies and know what the immune system is doing. So you may have done tests for your kid for strep antibodies. If you're concerned about pandas, you may look at strep antibodies like ASO or DNase B and say, oh, look, I've got antibodies to strep. All right. We can do this with different viruses. We can look for herpes virus. We can look for COVID virus and say, okay, look, I'm looking at the antibodies, the immune system attacking that substance, whether it's in the current or whether it's in the past, because our immune system has memory. So we can look at this past antibody level, or an antibody level from a past exposure, and try to figure out, has my body been exposed to this? And does my body think this is a foe? And that's how we're able to identify what the body's been exposed to that it doesn't like. And of course, once we get these antibodies to a substance, and let's still talk about strep throat, strep bacteria, those antibodies to strep are going to create this immune inflammatory cascade. And all that inflammation, all this inflammatory cascade is going to activate our immune system to destroy that bacteria. It's going to go and it's going to grab it and it's going to absorb it and it's going to destroy it. All right. Same thing with viruses. Grab them, destroy them. All right. So that's what our immune system does. It looks at what's a foe and attacks it with antibodies, with inflammation, and destroys it, okay? And that causes a lot of the symptoms that we experience as cold or flu symptoms. That can be fever, that can be pain, that can be mucus. Think of all the different symptoms you get when you get a cold or when you get strep throat, all right? Those symptoms are actually caused by our immune system. That's our immune system's response to healing those infections, all right? Now let's transfer over from the metaphor of infections and strep throat and viruses to food, all right? Same thing's going to happen, all right? We eat certain foods and the body looks at it and says, you know what? That's a good food, that's a good substance, that's a friend, let that pass through. Or that's a foe and I'm going to attack it. I'm going to attack it with antibodies. I'm going to attack it with inflammation. I'm going to attack it with similar symptoms that you may experience with a cold, but instead of symptoms being up here, because that's where the viruses and the bacteria are, the symptoms are in my gut, all right? What are those symptoms going to look like? Pain, bloating, abnormal bowels, okay? Behavioral changes. Any of those can happen because we have antibodies to a foe that creates inflammation, all right? So that inflammation from food that we might eat every day really can exacerbate the symptoms of autism. Whether it's our kids who have sensory problems and a little bit of stomach pain for us is a huge amount of pain for them, and that throws their behavior off, okay? Or the different bowel changes, or maybe we get so much inflammation we have leaky gut. And do we have good absorption of calories and nutrients, or do we have bad absorption of calories and nutrients? So just by eating a food that your body thinks is a foe and causes inflammation can create all of these symptoms that really worsen spectrum symptoms, all right? I do not think that foods cause autism at all, all right? But foods really can make these symptoms worse. So we can improve to a certain level the mood of our kids, the general health of our kids, the gastrointestinal health of our kids, the general development of our kids. We can help that by making sure they are eating the foods that their body likes and avoiding the foods that their body thinks is the enemy. Okay, so that's kind of big picture why we are interested in these diets. All right, now the question is, what diets are the best for our kids? Obviously, there's a lot of different diets out there. There's gluten-free, there's dairy-free, there's keto, there's paleo, there's GAPS, there's specific carbohydrate, there's soy-free, there's sugar-free, all these different diets, all right? Those diets will work for someone, okay? Keto's gonna work for someone. Gluten-free is gonna work for someone. Dairy-free is gonna work for someone, all right? All this stuff is going to be definitely helping someone, but not everyone. And so we've got to figure out for your child what's going to be the best diet for them, all right? Now that's our lofty medical attempt at doing the best for someone. Obviously, we've got to really hit where the rubber meets the road when most of our kids are picky eaters. Most of our kids don't want to try new things, and most of our kids are really going to will those dietary changes cause more benefits or more frustration in those initial phases. So we talk to a lot of parents in our practice about these diets, and a lot of parents want to do as much as they can for their kid. Changing diets is hard. Changing diets is hard for a kid with sensory issues. Changing diets is hard when you've got multiple people in the house. Changing diets is hard when you've got split families, okay? But you never know how it's going to help someone until you do it. So let me do this. Let me start with one of my favorite stories from our clinic, and then get into some research, and then talk about some different ways we can figure out what foods are going to be best for your child to eat or to avoid. Okay, so one of my favorite stories from my practice, and this is going back this has to be like 2007. What is that, 15 years ago? And saw a kid, he was 3 years old, okay, kid on the spectrum, no language. We decided with his family, we're going to put him on a gluten-free diet, okay? Guess what? After 1 month of a gluten-free diet, he started talking. Awesome. This is exactly what we want. This is grooving for him. This is part of his answer. This is obviously working. This is amazing. Great. Okay. Excuse me. Then, sometime after he's been gluten-free for a bit, he was with Grandma and Grandpa took him to McDonald's and said, all right, we got to go gluten-free. What's gluten-free here? Hey, French fries. French fries are just potatoes. That's gluten-free. Great. Got him some French fries and ate the French fries and stopped talking that day. Okay? Why? Because there's gluten in the flavor coatings of McDonald's French fries, or at least they were back in 2007. So didn't think it was, thought it was gluten-free, wasn't gluten-free, stopped the language in that child that day. And it took another month of going gluten-free for that language to come back. All right? So here's the pros and cons of that story. Pros are we got language by going gluten-free. We got language by avoiding a food that child didn't respond well with. Okay? And we did it twice. We did it initially, and then we had a slip up, and then we did it again. Okay? So that's the pros of this story, that diet for that child worked. All right? Downside is only one time of having gluten can set you off your track. All right? That's the difficult part of these diets, because I'll talk to families who say, you know what? We do gluten-free and dairy-free. Well, except for Fridays, he has pizza, and except for this, and except for this. But even if it's only once a week, you still don't get that month-long effect or that month-long time frame it takes for this to work. All right? That's the frustration of this stuff, that the diet, you never know if the diet's going to work unless you're 100%, period. All right? So that is part of this struggle. However, just because it's a struggle doesn't mean you shouldn't try it with your child. And again, I know it's hard, and I know our kids are picky eaters. I know our kids are defiant, and you may fear our kid's going to go on a hunger strike. I understand all that, all right? But that doesn't take away from the actual medical truth that this may help your child. And so we've got to now figure out what diet should we start with. And what I would recommend is always doing one food at a time. All right, you may overload yourself if there's too many foods. You're like, I can't do gluten-free and dairy-free and soy-free and sugar-free, and what's my kid going to eat? And I'm pulling my hair out, okay? Let's start with one food at a time. Maybe it's gluten, maybe it's dairy, whatever it may be, and figure out, hey, you know what, and I tell my families this, let's do one meal at a time, all right? Let's conquer breakfast. Where's my gluten in breakfast? Where's my dairy in breakfast? Where's my soy? Whatever you're avoiding, where is that at breakfast? Okay, let's try the different alternatives. Let's make our changes. Let's get my kid used to it. Awesome. I got breakfast done. Now let's move to lunch. Now let's move to dinner. Now let's move to snacks. Now let's move to Grandma and Grandpa's house. Now let's move to daycare and school. And you know what? Baby step into this and, separate it into chunk size, tangible, conquerable things to do. Okay? I can work on breakfast. I can handle breakfast. Now breakfast is gluten-free or dairy-free or whatever, all right? That's what we can do, okay? And Sarah just mentioned, I want to say it's a struggle being the diets, but I can 100% tell you diet change can definitely work. Gluten has been a culprit for us as well, okay? So again, great example from Sarah that, hey, this worked for their child. All right, now let's get into some scientific research, and then I want to get into some other things, and then we'll get our Q&A. Number one, when you look into the science about the diets, it's all over the map. All right. You'll see scientific studies that say, yeah, this works. You'll see scientific studies that say, nah, it doesn't work. Okay. So what do you believe? And one of my concerns with the scientific research is this, that you have to know where this research was being done. Okay. Because when we look at global foods, it's not all the same, okay? We're comparing apples to oranges, especially when we look here in the U.S. and research done in the U.S., where most of our food is genetically modified, most of our food has toxic pesticides like glyphosates, where you go to other countries and they don't have that, okay? Where you don't have GMO foods, you don't have glyphosate in the foods. Now, when we're doing research in those countries, can we really compare it to research here in the States or research where they eat genetically modified foods or glyphosate-laden foods versus non? And so now we're actually doing research on two totally different things. And that, for me, is a big component of the accuracy or the comparability of these research studies, all right? All right, so let's start out with, I picked a few that were beneficial just to give you some idea that, hey, there is some research showing that this is beneficial. Here's one that talks about the effects of a gluten-free diet on kids with autism, and this was pretty recent, 2016. Here we go. 53.9% of kids with autism have gastrointestinal abnormalities or symptoms. In the gluten-free diet group, which is this study, gastrointestinal symptoms decreased significantly, and there was a significant decrease in behavioral disorders. Pretty cool. Research study said, you know what? Gluten-free, gonna help my stomach, gonna help my gut, gonna help my behaviors. That's a good part. All right. Here's another one. This is a modified ketogenic diet. So we're doing like really high proteins and fats and very few carbs and grains. All right. And it improves behavior in children with autism. Down here, significant improvements were observed in imitation, body use, and fear or nervousness in these kids going on a keto diet. So again, we're not just cutting gluten, we're cutting grains, all right? So that's rice and that's oat and, all these other gluten-free grains that you get. It's still a grain, it's still a type of carb that some people don't do well with. That can help as well. All right, here's another one, the role of gluten in autism, and this talks about selective nutritional therapy for autism, and brain function shows improvement in behavioral changes. So a gluten-free diet has yielded positive outcomes, okay? And again, this was to looking at behaviors and how behaviors improved by avoiding a food that for that child caused inflammation. Let's go back to the biology of it, all right? I eat gluten, and guess what? Now I have a problem, and that problem is antibodies, and it's inflammation, and it's stomach upset, and it's behavioral changes. And all those things can be improved by avoiding that food, all right? And here's the last research study I want to show you. And this really talks about all of the studies that are out there. This is a meta-analysis, the good and the bad. And I thought this was a really important point to make, okay? So this was done last January 2021, the effect of a combined gluten-free and casein-free diet in kids with autism, a meta-analysis, all right? What I've highlighted is the results from these studies showed no effect of a gluten-free, casein-free diet. All right, so right out, this meta-analysis looks at multiple studies and says there's no effect. There's no beneficial effect by doing this diet. But then it continues on to say that the quality of evidence ranged from low to very low due to serious risk of bias, serious risk of inconsistency, and serious risk of imprecision. All right, so this meta-analysis said, yeah, we understand that these research studies showed no effect. However, we don't think they did very well. We don't think these studies are good quality. We don't think they're good methodology. And their conclusion, which I agree with, the limitations of the current literature, of the current science, hinder the possibility of drawing any solid conclusion. So I like that study because it understands and it brings the point of the research that's out there yet isn't great and isn't the best. So what do we do from there? Well, guess what? Maybe the science hasn't caught up with the reality that we see, all right? And the reality that we see is that not everybody does well with every food, period. So how do we know? How do you know what foods we can do that can help your child? Number one, testing, all right? I highly encourage you, get allergy food testing done and allergy environmental testing done. Get food allergy testing done. We're looking at IgE antibodies. That's the name of the antibodies that creates an allergic reaction. Get IgE testing on your foods, okay? That's a good place to start to say, you know what? I am actually allergic to these foods. And we'll often find dairy or wheat or egg or what have you, allergies, frank allergies, all right? The other test you can do is not for IgE allergy testing, but for IgG antibodies. Now, IgG antibodies is the term for the antibody that we look at when we're looking for an infection. When you're looking for strep antibodies, when you're looking for viral antibodies, you're looking for IgG, okay? When you're doing blood tests for COVID, you're looking for IgG antibodies to that virus. So now we're looking for IgG antibodies to foods, all right? This is termed a food sensitivity. So excuse me, you may also want to get the IgG food testing on top of the IgE food testing. We have the IgG food testing on our website if you're interested in getting this. The test looks like this, and basically what it does, it's a very simple, basic food IgG test. There are much more comprehensive ones out there, but if you want to start with a basic one, this looks at 30 foods, and it'll tell you you have no inflammation to them, you have mild, you have moderate, or you have severe. Okay, so this patient had severe to egg, moderate to milk and peanut, and mild to almond, and I can't even read the rest there, mustard and strawberry. Mustard's more of an allergen than you'd think. It's weird. They flag mustard out, when you look at foods and ingredients, they'll say, oh, it contains dairy or wheat or soy or typical allergens. They don't flag mustard, but in Canada they do. So Canada is a registered allergen. In Canada, mustard is a registered allergen, but we ignore it here in the States. Anyway, that's the IgG food analysis. So if you're interested in that, we do have it on our website. Ours is a finger stick. So you get this tiny little needle in the test kit. You're supposed to prick the finger and put like blood on the paper, but guess what? That really hurts. So what I would recommend is either the ear or the heel of the foot, okay? Because blood is blood. Trust me, the blood in your finger is the same as blood everywhere else. You just got to get that blood on the paper and send it in. Now, that being said, IgE and IgG food testing is not the end-all and be-all, okay? You can still have a reaction to a food and it not come up on those tests. So what do? I highly encourage trial and error, okay? Pick a food. I don't care what it is, gluten, dairy, soy, sugar, whatever. Say, okay, we're going to find alternatives for this, and we're going to do it for a month, just like that kid with the French fries. We're going to do it for a month and see what happens. But you've got to be 100%. If you're not 100%, you're wasting your time, okay? Because you cannot evaluate if you did a month of gluten-free, except for Fridays, which is pizza night, you can't evaluate if it's working because it doesn't take 6 days to change the symptoms from a food reaction, okay? It's going to take a month. It takes that long. Okay, so that's kind of a guidance of, geez, what do I do? And again, what I would do is get IgE food allergy testing, get IgG food sensitivity testing, pick a food and try it and jump in 100% and see what happens, okay? With our daughter, I talk about my daughter a lot in our Facebook Lives. We raised her gluten-free, dairy-free. And then when she was 3, we said, you know what? Let's try it and see what happens. So we tried her on gluten. She was okay. Yeah, really no reaction. Sometimes if she eats a lot of gluten, she'll get a little bit of eczema, a few little dots, but not a lot. Then we tried dairy on her, and it was just an explosion of gastrointestinal symptoms and behavioral symptoms within minutes, okay? So, you know, if you do these food eliminations and then you get to a point you're like, geez, I wonder if they can eat this food again. Try it and watch, all right? But be warned, if you do that, and you get a bad reaction, it may take a month to get back, all right? So ups and downs with this whole dietary thing and food thing. But I'll tell you, you've got to avoid the foods that are causing inflammation, period. All right, couple other things, and then we'll get into the live questions. Just because you're eating a food doesn't mean you're digesting a food, all right? And I see so many people unable to digest their foods, and therefore that causes more inflammation because you got this big hunk of chicken nugget sitting in your intestines and not going anywhere. And A, it's going to cause pain. And then B, you don't get the nutrients or the calories, the vitamins or whatever, okay? So test yourself for digestive enzyme levels, all right? We have stool tests on our website. Here's an example of a stool test. This is their digestive enzyme level called pancreatic elastase. This patient had less than 50, which is super low, which is severe pancreatic insufficiency is less than 100. This one's less than 50. Does that mean they have 49? Does that mean they have 0? We have no idea the level's so low, okay? Gave this patient digestive enzymes, had a great 2 months, okay? So we've got some digestive enzymes on our website if you're interested. For kids who like chewable tablets, we have a chewable digestive enzyme, tastes like papaya. One of our new products is called Super Digestive Enzyme. This is a much more comprehensive formula than our chewable, but it's a capsule. You can open it up and mix the powder into a food. But let me say this, if you're mixing digestive enzymes into food, that food will liquefy. That's what enzymes do. Enzymes are digesting your food. So if you take an enzyme powder and mix it into some food, it's going to liquefy in front of your eyes. That's what enzymes, that's a function. That's what it does in our gut, okay? Also, if you want to see if gluten is a problem, you may want to try a gluten digestive enzyme. So here's a gluten digestive enzyme. This digestive enzyme will digest gluten only. And if you digest the gluten, maybe it doesn't have that kind of inflammatory reaction in your gut, all right? That's not a definite, it's a possibility, but it's something to try because if you do try gluten digestive enzyme when you eat gluten, you're like, wow, I feel a lot better, it's probably a sign you should avoid gluten, okay? All right, so the other thing I do want to mention when it comes to digestion is our probiotics, our microbiome, all right, also helps with our digestion. So digestive enzymes are great, I love them, but our probiotics do some digesting as well. And if we have healthy probiotics, they have healthy digestion. If we have unhealthy probiotics and we have infections like Candida, you're not going to get that digestive support. So one of the best ways to change your flora is with fiber, all right? Dietary fiber, whole grains, fiber supplements, prebiotic supplements will help feed good bacteria and remove bad microbes, all right? That, however, can cause some pain. So if you've ever started a prebiotic supplement, if you've ever, added dietary fiber to your child and they seem to get worse, you probably have a lot of altered probiotics in your gut, and those guys that are leaving are kind of putting up a fight on their way out. So you may see some bad symptoms initially when you start a prebiotic or add fiber to your diet, but that's the kind of the transition that you got to go through in order to clean yourself out. All right. Again, not an easy road, but a necessary road to try. Because what if you're one of these kids where you stop gluten and the kid starts talking? You never know until you do it, and you never know until you do it 100%. So start at one food at a time. You don't got to jump in the water here. We can baby step. Baby step your way through it till you get there. Try the alternatives with your kids until you're like, okay, I got breakfast done. I got snacks done. I got dinner done. I got lunch done. And now, okay, it took a month, but now I'm on a gluten-free diet or a dairy-free diet or whatever, or GAPS or keto or whatever you want to try, okay? And again, you never know until you do it.